Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Surgent CPA Review webinar, Mastering the CPA Exam, Passing 4 Parts by the End of Year 2020. My name is Paul Weiss. I'm Vice President of Global Strategic Partnerships in Surgent Exam Review, and I'm very happy you could join tonight. Over the next 45 to 50 minutes, we'll be discussing a variety of topics as it relates to study programs, time management strategies, and exam tips, and the express goal being of helping you get through the CPA exam in the most efficient manner and shortest amount of time. Just a little bit of background on myself. I've been with Surgent since 2016, and I've spent the last 21 years in the education and accounting exam prep space. In addition to my responsibilities managing our global client relationships, I also serve as a CPA exam coach for our students, and that's a position I've held for over 10 years throughout my career. I currently reside in Northeast Pennsylvania. I'm in a little town called Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. I'm about 90 minutes north of Philadelphia. So wherever you are, I hope you are safe and well. And again, welcome. We're super happy that you could join this evening. Now, for those of you who have attended a Surgent webinar in the past, you're going to notice some very familiar themes tonight. These are related to study tips, time management, and the psychology of testing, or as I like to refer to it, mental fitness. Mental fitness is a most under-talked about factor in passing the exam. So we're going to hit that topic very hard tonight. And further, the topics that I just mentioned, they're common themes no matter what time frame you're endeavoring to get through the exam in, but they become all the more critical as you accelerate that window for passing. So again, tonight we're going to talk about those important topics we just mentioned, and then we're going to take a look at what a 4 to 5 month plan would look like as it relates to passing the exam. So if you're new to the process, if you're a current Surgent student, or even if you're with another CPA review course, welcome. There's information that is relevant to anyone at any point along their CPA review journey. Also, if you're perhaps somebody who maybe just got their score report recently and you didn't pass, I promise you that the information contained within, specifically regarded to time management and mental fitness, is going to be extremely helpful for you as you reset your studies. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. At the end of tonight's presentation, you will be emailed a PDF of the slides along with a recording of the webinar that you can access if you want to go back and review any particular areas or topics. Also, at the end, we will save time for your questions and answers. So we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So during the presentation, if you want to go ahead and type those questions as we go along, there's a chat function where you can input your questions. And again, we will address those at the conclusion of the webinar. Also, at the end of the presentation, I will make available my contact information. So if anyone has any additional questions on the content or getting back on track for their studies, you can reach out to me directly and we can set up a consultation. So before we get started, just real quickly, there's a little raise hand function. I just want to make sure that everybody can see my screen and that everybody can hear me. So if you want to just quickly give me a show of hands if you want to raise your hand. Okay, that looks good. Okay, thank you. Got those coming in perfect. That's excellent. So again, if they're usually we get through these without any technical issues, but just if there is, please let me know. So thank you again and welcome, and we will go ahead and get started. So first off, we want to give, like we do with every webinar, we want to give a COVID-19 update. And the good news is there haven't been a lot of changes recently. So we're kind of getting back on track and things are stabilizing to, to the best that they've been in a while. So in those of you who are testing or, preparing to test or have, submitted your notice to schedule with Prometric, you probably understand that. But just again, to review it real quickly, all the U.S. test centers obviously closed May 1st. But most centers were open by June 1st. The physical distancing extended hours capacity approached 80%. It's near 100% capacity now. Now this is really important though. Near 100% capacity refers to the testing sites, not the seating capacity as it was prior to March. So Prometric is still operating under state and local guidelines, which in most cases, again, is going to limit the amount of seating. So my point being, In terms of the number of sites are open, you're in good shape, but please plan ahead. Be a little bit flexible, certainly with your timing, or maybe even more so your location as it relates to where you take the test. But again, the CPA exam is considered a critical exam, a necessary exam, and so the good news is we are back operating for that. A couple other things. CPA exam NTSs or notice to schedule extensions. So if you had an NTS with an expiration date of April 1st of this year all the way through December 30th, if you're in one of the blue states, it's automatically been extended until December 31st, 2020. NTSs with an expiration date from April through December have been extended through December 31st. If you're in one of the 4 yellow states, if your NTS expired after June 30th, so that could be, it's right now, they're handling those on a case-by-case basis, so you want to check with NASBA and your local state board of accountancy. My understanding is that in most cases they have extended those, but again, those are on a case-by-case basis. And then obviously Idaho, that is definitely on a case-by-case basis. It has been all along. So good news is if you're in one of the blue states, you're in good shape. And actually, to be honest with you, we have not had reports of anybody having difficulties. So NASBA.org is the place you want to go for recurring updates. Next thing is the 18-month exam credit extensions. This is different than the notice to schedule within the 18 months. So most of the 55 jurisdictions have temporarily extended the 18-month exam credit window through December 31st. So what we're talking about is, and again, we're going to hit that heavy tonight, the 18-month window. So if you were within that 18-month window where you were going to lose credit for a part that you had passed, and that window fell after the shutdown in March, most of the 55 jurisdictions have extended that through December 31st. The outliers are listed. Again, if you're in one of those areas, state boards of accountancy, check with them, or again, check with NASBA.org CPA exam credit extensions. And then finally, and this is just fantastic news, continuing testing status. So effective July 1st of this year, NASBA went to year-round testing. That has changed the game in terms of planning and scheduling. And again, we'll talk about this because this really relates to tonight's topic, specifically trying to get through all 4 sections in a compressed amount of time. So tremendous good news there. As you can see, it's 52 of the 55 jurisdictions have gone to this. The Connecticut and Michigan, those are close to happening, and the only outlier we have in this particular case is South Carolina, which is on pace for 2021. But if you're not in South Carolina, you're in good shape as far as continuous testing, which we will talk about, like I said, in a little bit. So let's move on to the exam itself. Now, this is typical content. What you see on the screen is typical content, which everybody knows or should know, but it's important to break it down a little bit. So here's the thing. Most people, like I said, have seen this, and you probably, if you were an accounting major in school, or if you're with an accounting firm, have been exposed to the CPA exam throughout your studies, you have seen something like this. And typically, it's been where somebody from one of the CPA review courses comes in and gives a presentation, and they will tell you, how many parts the exam is. They will tell you how many questions are on the exam. They will say it's 4 hours per section, 16 total hours. You've probably seen some then additional information like, okay, so you're going to study about 4 to 7 weeks per part. You're going to study about 15 to 25 hours per week. And since 2017, you've probably seen some additional information like that, which talks about the cognitive skill levels that are tested on the exam. So remembering and understanding and application, and then some of those higher level skills like analysis and evaluation. And there was probably some reference to the weighting of the questions versus the simulations, etc. So all of that is important. But a lot of times that information is given to you out of order, and it is given out of context. So before we concentrate on this information at all, we have to start from the very beginning. And the very beginning goes back to those first 2 questions, or first 2 comments rather, about studying how many weeks and how many hours per week, which is pretty good general information. but more importantly are those 4 items that I have highlighted. So think about this as building the framework for your program. And again, if you're already in the process, you know, I think you understand exactly what I'm talking about. If you're just getting started, or if you're someone who's retooling your studies due to having to restart or not passing a section, again, I just can't stress how critical this is. I liken this to a workout regimen or maybe a change in approach to eating. Before you do it, you don't just one day decide, okay, I'm on it, I'm going to the gym, I'm going to work out. It never works, right? You have to set up the framework, you have to set up the plan, and it's no different when it comes to setting up a study program. So think about how often you're going to study, and then how effective is your study time? Are you in a place, are you in a position where you can actually make the most out of your study time, where you can eliminate distractions? What days do you have scheduled off? That's a question I often get. Do I need to take days off? And the answer is absolutely, you have to take days off. In fact, one of the key mistakes people sometimes make is they overstudy, and then they're not getting the most out of what they can do. So it's quality study time. And by the way, I should probably mention at this point, you know, you're going to hear a lot of cliches tonight, right? Quality study time, having a positive attitude. Those are all relevant throughout, and they do have meaning. So we really want to focus on those, and I will bring those to light as we talk about them. Other considerations to think about too is how vested is not only are you in the process, but is your support system around you? Do you have a mentor? Is your family vested in this process? Those are all things that sometimes take a backseat to just setting up a study plan, right? Which was, well, I'm going to study, you know, 20 hours a week and study on Tuesday and Thursday and Saturday, which is all important. But setting up this framework is really critical. So I urge you, as you're thinking through this process, again, if you're just getting started or retooling, think about this, because that gets really critical. It's important to get this off right if you're going to do something like try and pass 4 parts in a compressed amount of time. So we're going to call this mental fitness tip number 1. Setting the framework is key to success, both in application, but more importantly, in mental preparation. Again, that goes back to mental fitness and also the psychology of testing. Okay? Now, the next question, and we get this all the time, is what sequence should I take the exam in? So normally, when somebody asks about sequence and timing, we will recommend this as you see on the screen. We will recommend that you take financial first, and then you take audit second, and you'll take regulation, and then BEC. Now, there's 2 reasons that we do this. One, again, has to do with the psychology of testing. There is a perception that financial is the hardest of the 4. In reality, the pass rates nationally between the 4 parts are within about 7 to 8 points of each other, give or take, and financial, audit, and regulation are within about 3 points to each other. It's a little more than 1 or 2 nationally. But financial is the most voluminous of the 4 sections, right? It's the most material that you have to study. Those of you who've looked at a financial textbook understand exactly what I'm talking about. It is the most material, the widest breadth of information and topics to cover. So psychologically, if you can get through that first, that can make a difference, right? It's like, okay, so I got through what is deemed to be the hardest, or, you know, the most, it's going to take the most time to study. The others might become a little bit easier. So that's one way to look at it. Also, there is information that is covered in financial that overlaps into audit, overlaps a bit into regulation, and even on BEC. So there is some thought to the, you know, thought out there that if you get through financial, it can help you in the other sections. So something to consider. But the tip again is, and we'll call this mental fitness tip number 2, the order in which you take the sections does matter. And what I mean by that is part of the planning process. So I've worked with students over the years, and when we'll sit down and I'll say, okay, so which order are you going to take the exam in? And they're like, well, I don't know. And believe it or not, that happens, right? Or which order do you think I should take them in, right? Is the question I get back. So again, those are things to consider. And as a student coach, it's something, you know, that I would work with students on, but it's important to understand what you feel best about doing and understand why you're taking those, because again, that's part of the study program, right? Now, the next question then becomes, how long should I take to pass? So in a typical scenario, if somebody just, you know, a regular student comes up and says, how long would you recommend that I take to pass the exam? This is a plan that we would roll out. Now, it might vary between, you know, 8 months, 7.5, 9 months or so, but a general good look at it is a 9-month plan. And I've thrown these you know, topics up there, the section, excuse me, so you can kind of see what the spacing looks like. But here's why this is important, and here's why we talk about a 9-month plan, and certainly no more than a 9-month plan. That's something to keep in mind, is the 18-month rule. So mental fitness tip number 3, the number one reason that derails people from achieving their goal of passing the exam is getting caught by the 18-month rule. And I'm assuming everybody knows what the 18-month rule, but basically it's once you pass the first part, your first section, you have 18 months from that date to pass the other 3, or you lose credit for that first part that you pass. So I want to just illustrate this. And again, for those of you who know this, you know, please bear with me on this, because these things that we hit on, they may not seem relevant perhaps to you as an individual, but they're so critical because these are common themes, again, that we see throughout the process. So let's just take a look at this, for example. So let's start with March 1st. Let's assume that I passed my first part in March 1st of this year. And then let's say I passed my second part in July 1st, and then my third part in February, which means the 18-month window beginning at March 1st ends in August 31st. So that means I have to pass all 4 parts by August 31st. So if I pass the first 3 parts, and then what happens? Sometimes, and believe it or not, this happens more often than you think. It's like, okay, well, I still have, you know, 7 months. I can get that 4th part passed. And then what happens is there's a change in job, or there's a life event, or there's something unforeseen, or there's a pandemic, or, you know, whatever it is, and suddenly you're up against that 18 months, right? And so what happens if you don't pass that 4th part? As we mentioned, it's an 18-month rolling window, again, stating the obvious, so you lose credit for that first part you passed back in March, and then the 18-month rolls to the date of the next section that you passed. So in this example, it rolls to July 1st, and that would give the 18-month window now through the end of the year, December 31st, 2021. But here's where it becomes difficult. Think about where you are in terms of the calendar. In this scenario, when you didn't get all 4 parts passed with the 18-month window that we laid out, you're already at September 1st, 2021, right? And so now you have 4 months in which you have to pass 2 sections, but there's that sort of psychological thought process like, you know, I couldn't get them all done in 18 months, and now I got to take 2 in 4 months. And also, one of the more crushing things is to you know, think about having to take or retake rather a section that you already passed, having to retake for that. That can be very debilitating. So again, that's the number one thing that derails people. And so be aware of that. Think about that as you plan out your studies. And obviously we're going to talk about that in just a minute as it relates to compressed time schedules, but certainly no more than 9 months. Now, I would add, if you're one of those folks that has had this happen, and we work with a lot of students who have gotten into this situation, although it is a problem, it's not something that you can't get out of. But the mistake that people make in trying to fix it is they go back and they just start from where they left off, right? If you're in a position where you've lost credit for a section and you have to retake it, you really want to sit back and retool your entire study program. And again, like I said at the end, I'm happy to give you my information, and we'll, you know, talk about what a study program would look like that, you know, moving forward if you're in that situation. So there is hope. It can be done. It's just a sort of, you kind of need to sit back and figure it out again and start from the beginning, which can be done. Okay. So all that said, now let's talk about what a 4.5 to 5 month plan would look like. Now, normally, if somebody asks me this and they say, hey, can I pass all 4 parts in 4 months? Normally, my commentary would be, yeah, it's doable, but it is extremely difficult. I will caveat that by saying it is still very difficult, and a lot of things have to go right, and which is where we're building this framework to this discussion, right? And building up to that. But the year-round testing that began July 1st, 2020 of this year, that made a huge difference. And suddenly this becomes a lot more doable than it did in the past. So one, the obvious thing is the additional days that are available for testing, but also it is the rescheduling aspect of it. So when I'm speaking about that is, I'm sure everybody knows, but prior to year-round testing, if you failed the section in one of the testing windows, you couldn't take that section again until the next testing window. So for folks that are trying to pass in 4 to 5 months, the real important thing here is the scheduling aspect. But if you're somebody that's maybe thinking about, well, I might be able to do this in 6 months, right? I might be able to go, you know, October through March, right? So suddenly having those additional days and not having to wait if you do have to retake a section, that becomes a huge boon to this entire process, right? So again, that's something that has come into play, and so it's changed sort of the way that we approach this, and that's why that's why we're talking about doing this. So what would this look like in terms of sequence and then planning for an accelerated study program? So remember I said you're going to take financial first, you're going to take BEC last. So basically you want to just forget what I told you, and you want to look at it in terms of doing it in reverse. So basically to do this in 4.5, 5, or even let's say 6 months, you want to flip the order of what you're doing. If you're starting from fresh and you want to take BEC first, and then you want to leave audit and regulation as your 2 middle sections, and then you want to take financial at the end. And here's why. Depending upon where you are in the study process, now I've aligned this out as going specifically getting all of these done by the end of the year. This is extremely aggressive given the fact that we're at September 9th and we would be looking at taking BEC you know, right around the end of September. But you can compress the study time in BEC. BEC has the highest pass rates, and with Surgeon, using the adaptive technology, you're going to get through that very, very quickly. So you could actually think about starting now and you know, potentially get BEC, assuming that everything else with the registration and your scheduling is good. You could think about doing that at the end of September. And then from there, then you can go into audit. And I've laid out some sample ideas of what that would look like. So 4 to 5 weeks for audit, right around 4, regulation 4 weeks. And then the reason you take financial last is because you want to set it up so that you have the most time to study for financial. Also, think about this. Typically, as we get into towards the 3rd week of November and into December, that's when a lot of people have vacation time. A lot of companies, you know, it's less busy depending upon, you know, what section of the field you're working in. There can be some extra time built around the holidays to really maximize your study time. So this is something that you want to take a look at. This is what it would look like in terms of if you were going to do it now through the end of the year. And again, you know, afterwards, like I said at the end of this presentation, if this is something you're really thinking about doing, you want to get with me and we'll map out this day by day almost and you know, to figure out what it looks like. Okay. Now, there's one other option, and that would be what I call 5-month plan, basically starting to study now. So if you look, I have the orange dot on September 9th, right? Think about September 9th. If you were to study now and think about passing all 4 parts by the end of January, this is doable. This is definitely doable. Now, there's not a lot of margin for error. Obviously, a lot of things have to go right, and we're going to talk about the scheduling and then the actual exam itself, but it's doable. So you could map this out. You could take BEC first, and if you look at the way we put this, this gives you well over 4 weeks in each area to go ahead and study, and you're actually saving yourself for financial. You're giving yourself about 5 to 6 weeks, which is more than enough time, especially with the Surgeon adaptive technology. So 2 models. One we're looking at right before the end of by the end of the year, which is very aggressive depending, or because of where we are now, but also thinking about maybe just extending that out. And how cool would that be to have, you know, 3 of the sections done before you head into the new year. So one thing I do want to point out, regardless of which model you're looking at, You can flip regulation and audit in either one, but the key is you do not want to take, you want to take audit after October, or excuse me, regulation after October 1st. So the CARES Act, which was passed in March, is eligible for testing beginning in October. So there's been a lot of updates to the regulation section, and those are coming now. And so you want to make sure that you're studying for the right section or the right information related to the right section. So I'm just telling everybody, if you haven't done it yet, just save regulation for after October. Okay, and again, at the end, I'm willing to take specific questions on that if you would like. A couple other things, you want to schedule your exams early. This goes without saying as it relates to what we're trying to do here, and a lot of this has to do, obviously, with some of the realities of COVID and some of the realities of the state boards of accountancy, coupled with the registrars at universities and things like that. We have heard, depending upon which state, there's been good news, though, is that the registrars at the universities are very good about getting the information over to NASBA in the local state boards of accountancy in terms of qualifying to take the exam. So the broader point here is, if you're trying to do something like what we're talking about, you probably already want to be in that process, and you most definitely want to stay on top of that process throughout. And then obviously NASBA.org/exam/CPA exam is where you can go to schedule your exams, and it's pretty well laid out. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this, but it gives you all the information that you need to know and directs you to the guidelines based on your particular state. Okay, so we've built the framework now in terms of kind of thinking about what a study program looks like, which order we're going to take the exams in, sort of a quantitative look at how many weeks we would need based on this compressed model. But let's get into time management. We're going to talk specifically about time management on multiple choice questions and then simulations. This is critical no matter when you're trying to do this, but if you're trying to do something that is compressed, the margin for error is less, and so this becomes even more important because you don't have the luxury, right, if you're going to do this, to retake a section. So time management is critical on the exam, and what we're looking at here is, and remember I showed you this in the beginning and I said it would make sense later. Now this is important. Okay, so taking a look, for instance, at financial, that has 66 multiple choice questions and then it has 8 simulations. So you need to get through those questions as quickly as possible in order to save time for the simulations. And this is something I think that does not get talked about enough. So when CPA review providers, they give information on what the exam is, you need to be spending more time on how. And so at Surgent, we talk a lot about the how, and the how is, how do you manage that time within the 4-hour exam? Well, when you're studying, you first master content, and then timing comes later. And timing comes from retention. So think about it in terms of mastering content first, and then building retention, which builds the timing. So I want to show you what I mean by that. So I mean, this is a pretty decent example of a multiple choice question that you would see in FAR. And so, and I'm hoping that a lot of people know this, but if you don't, this is something to keep in mind. So one of the things that helps people master timing right out of the gate is to very quickly at the beginning understand what the examiners are asking. So what do you really need to know on each and every question? Okay, and how do you do that? Well, you do that by looking at the stem of the question first. The stem of the question is the last sentence, right? The last sentence or 2 sentences, usually it's the last sentence. And so by doing that, what do? Well, you save valuable time because, what happens is people will start at the beginning and read the question, and sometimes it's a long question, right? Especially when you get to those into the simulations. And then you get to the stem and it's like, okay, so like in this example, under IFRS, what is the depreciation expense for the year ended December 31st, year 1? Now, what again am I looking at, right? And so then you go back, and now you go back and you put together sort of the components, right? So in this example, you figure out, okay, well, depreciation expenses under IFRS is what they're asking for. IFRS uses component depreciation. Now I can go back and do my calculations. If you go to the stem of the question, First, you're going to save valuable time by most likely not having to reread what you already read. And believe me, when you're talking about that over 66 to 78 multiple choice questions and then the simulations, those few seconds add up. If you actually take the time to read this and then go back and reread it, put a stopwatch to it, you'll see how much time you save by doing that method that we're recommending. And again, I think this is a pretty common method of studying, but it's important to remember because in the beginning, people get lost in this. And so if you have that study tip right out of the gate, you're going to save time. And you get used to thinking in the manner of, what do I need to do? What do I need to know? Right? And so in this case, obviously, we can go back and we can do the calculations. $100 million, 80%, 20-year useful life. And then the other two components are 10 million each. One is 4 years, one is 5 years useful life, straight line depreciation. And you can pretty easily get to the answer of $8.5 million. Okay, so if you are moving quickly, right, through the exam process, and you're trying to compress your studies, you're going to have to be able to do this. So you're going to have to do the content aspect of it, but you're going to have to get to the retention part more quickly because you have less study time. So if you're a surgeon student, that's why we recommend you using the adaptive method to study, because it really does save time. And I'll talk about that just briefly at the end. But if you're with another course, you might want to consider reaching out. We have some free tools that can help people that are even with other courses to see where they're at, to see where their areas of strength and weaknesses are, and that might help you as you sort of, approach this this compressed time of study. Okay. Now, a couple other things, and this is really important. As you're going through on the exam, it's important to never leave a question blank. If for some reason you don't know an answer, you want to go ahead and guess. It is not a negatively graded exam. And you really want to think about that internal clock of 1.5 minutes or less on each multiple choice question so you can save time for the simulations. Now, here's something that's really important. And again, I have made the assumption that people understand what pretest questions are, but if you're new to the process, you might not. So the examiners include pretest questions on the exam. 15 to 20% of the questions are experimental. They don't count. The examiners want to see what a particular group of cohorts know about a particular topic at a given point in time. They may choose to add those into future iterations of the exam, but at this particular time, those questions don't count. Now, you don't know which questions they are, so obviously, you always want to answer every question, as we just discussed. But here's why this is important. There's a couple things. One has to do, again, with the psychology of testing. So I've talked to students in the past who weren't aware of this concept, and they got into the exam and they were extremely prepared. They'd studied, and then all of a sudden they got 5 or 6 questions that they'd never seen. And so what happens if you're not aware of this concept or thinking about that, suddenly you're like, well, wait a minute, I didn't study this. I didn't see that question. Did I not prepare well? Did my review provider not help me? Right? You sort of get into that. You start to get into that frame of mind, and that negative mental frame of mind that you can get into just quickly like that can derail you for seconds and or minutes, because it's taking away from your sole focus of each question. So it's really important, and this is just a broad tip across the way. It's really important to practice, when you're working through. That's why it's so important to cut out those distractions, right? Because just the simplest thing of thinking about something else, right? It sounds kind of silly, but 10 seconds here, 15 seconds here, it adds up, right? So as you're studying and as you're doing, practicing and doing the practice exams, think about that. Your sole focus is staying on target. And one of the ways is to understand about pretest questions. So we're going to give you mental fitness tips 4A and 4B. Understanding the concept of pretest questions, which is what we just talked about, and then also understanding what the 75 means. Everybody knows that the passing score on the CPA exam is 75. It's important to understand it's 75 points. It is not a percentage, and it is not a curve. Each question and each part of a simulation has a specific point value. Your goal is to get as many points as possible and get at least 75. So think about that in terms as you're studying. Don't worry about percentages or get distracted by, oh, I heard this was a curve, or, you know, I got to take my exam at a certain point in time because I have a better chance of passing those. None of those are factual. It's 75 points. Each question has a point value. Your goal is to get as many as you can correct. All right, let's then move on to time management as it relates to the task-based simulations. And I want to spend a minute here because this is important. So if you remember in the beginning when we ran through those slides quickly where we talked about the cognitive level of testing, and then I also showed what the breakdown was in terms of the weighting, right? So 50% of the test is multiple choice questions, and then 50% of the exam in financial audit and regulation is weighted by simulations, and the 35% in BEC plus the written communications. So it's important to understand the simulations because, believe it or not, a common mistake that people make is they don't spend enough time practicing the simulations. They think that they can get through just doing the multiple choice questions, and then that ends up costing people at the end. So just one tip I would just add here, or not tip, but just as a fact I would add, is that virtually everybody gets through the sections in time when they're taking the exam. Very, very few, it's a minute percentage of people actually time out and don't pass or don't finish in time. But what gets people is they get rushed because they spent too much time on the multiple choice questions and didn't save enough time for the simulations. If you're someone that's taken the exam, you can probably understand what I'm talking about. So it's important to make sure that you're working the questions, also studying the simulations, and with the Surgeon course, we work those in throughout so that you're prepared. But the other thing, and this is really important, is to understand the number of exhibits that you can get on any particular simulation. So if you're taking a look at the screen and you see what's highlighted, this is another thing. So what happens is when people are studying, they see the simulations with a less amount of exhibits, like 3 or 4, and I'll show you a couple examples in a minute. And they're like, yeah, those are the ones I'm going to do because I just want to get familiar with the software and I just don't want to take that long to do a simulation. That is a mistake. So I urge everybody to either do the longer, to make sure and do the longer simulations. But if you're doing the shorter simulations, what you really want to practice is you really want to practice understanding what the exhibits mean. And that is a big thing as it relates to saving time and getting through the process. So here's an example. This is a very simple simulation in terms of, right, there's 2 exhibits to look at. But even in this simulation, you still have to figure out what they're asking you to do. And you still have a lot of things to do once you get into it, right? So you're still gonna have to figure out what the variance is, what the amount is, whether it's favorable or unfavorable. That can take you, 10 to 15 minutes. Then when you get into something like this is an example of a document review simulation. These can have like 4 exhibits, 5 exhibits. They can also have 9 or 10 exhibits up here to look at, right? And so it's critical to understand how to solve it, which is you basically attack the simulation the same way as you attack the multiple choice questions, figuring out what do the examiners want you to know. That's important because that's going to save valuable time as you go through it. But also, this is critical, being able to look at these exhibits and quickly understand what they mean, and then also, are they relevant to the task at hand? And the reason why I want to stress that is because the examiners have a fun little habit. Those of you who've taken the test know, sometimes they throw in exhibits that you don't need. And so if you have to spend time figuring out what they mean, perhaps looking them up, there's an authoritative literature tab. Everyone's going to have a research simulation, but you can use that authoritative literature tab throughout. If you have to do a lot of research or you have to think about what does these mean, what does a consolidated statement of operation mean, you're going to chew up valuable time that you need to solve these. So as you're going through and as you are studying, make sure that you're spending enough time doing the more complicated simulations, but also that you're understanding how to solve them, quickly identifying what the examiners want, and then also, most importantly, understanding what do the exhibits mean? What do the exhibits mean? And can you quickly identify those as it relates to the task at hand? Now, a couple other things, and I just have one slide on this particular thing, but I want to stress this. Doing a practice exam at least 1 week before your exam date is critical. And so remember when we talked about that generic information, right, about spending 4 weeks or 5 weeks, and you got to figure out how many hours per day you're going to study. Everybody studies at a different pace, right? And so to just sit here and go, okay, well, it's going to take you 4 weeks, and you're going to have to study 12 hours during the week and 10 hours on the weekend. You don't really know that until you get into the study process. So that's why throughout the adaptive technology with Surgeon, right, you're constantly getting towards that exam date and targeting your ready score. But that's also why we throw out the option of the consultations, because we want to work with you along the way to make sure that you're getting through it in the proper amount of time. Now, all that being equal, then, is you get about a week before the exam, you want to sit down and you want to do a practice exam. Practice exam is critical for several reasons, the least of which, or not the least of which, excuse me, is that you need to get used to sitting for 3.5 to 4 hours in one setting and just taking those question by question by question. A common mistake that people make is they do all the right things to study, all the things that we've discussed, right, all those tips and everything, but they only do it in 1.5 hour or 2 hour increments, and then they get to the exam site, and that's the first time they've actually had to sit for 3.5 to 4 hours and go through that process. And it is a physical as well as mental effort to do that, right? Sitting for 4 hours during the day at your desk, people get up, they move around, they do certain things. We don't just really sit locked in for 3.5 to 4 hours. So make sure you do the exam, not only so you can understand where you are in terms of exam readiness, but also getting used to that experience of sitting for 3.5 to 4 hours. And then one that probably seems pretty obvious is, don't study on your exam day. I tell people not even to study the night before. And this is going to be one of those cliches that we referenced. What you know is what you know, and you need to be confident, and you need to go with that. So again, you've heard it a lot. Well, it's a state of mind. You got to be optimistic. You got to be confident. That really does make a difference in all those things that we talked about throughout the process, right, of staying in that positive mental framework for the exam. This is critical. If you go in, if you're prepared, you stay confident and trust your first instinct. Your first instinct is usually the best answer in any situation. So keep that frame of mind in hand, and what that leads, or what that ends up being, is a product of the reason you can do that is because you put all these other things in place leading up to that, right? And that's what makes doing this in 9 months or 6 months or 5 months, whatever it is, that's what makes this doable, is doing that framework and setting that up along the way. And then being able to self-analyze and looking and going, okay, is what I'm doing working? Do I need help? Do I need to change it up? Taking advantage of those resources along the way. A couple other things I'd like to point out here too, and this again probably goes back to the psychology of testing, but and again, this is in a perfect world. Things are a little different now, as we discussed at the beginning, right, with the seating capacity at Prometric, but try and still pick out your optimal exam dates, but more importantly, your exam time. So if you are a morning person, try and schedule your exam in the morning. If you're an evening person, or an afternoon person, try and schedule your exam later in the day. I can do a lot of things well in the morning, but I prefer to do them later in the day. So I can give this presentation at 7 a.m. I prefer to give it at 7 p.m., right? And so take that same approach towards your exam. That's a mistake people make too, is they pick whatever time is available and don't really think about it. And excuse me. And then you get to this point where you're like, okay, well, I was kind of sleepy as I walked in at 9 o'clock. And it's like, well, then, why did you schedule it at 9 o'clock, right? So again, we have some things we have to work around, obviously, with the situation, but to the best of your ability, schedule your exams at an appropriate time that makes sense for you. And then also do your best to not reschedule if you don't have to. Rescheduling a section should be your last resort, and it has little to do with the monetary aspect of it. There is one, obviously, especially if you're within 5 days, you're going to repay for the exam, but it has to do, again, with that mental fitness or psychology of testing. Once you reschedule one, trust me, it gets easier to reschedule the next one, and then pretty soon you can get into that rut of being up against the clock or just sort of like, you know, just not dreading it. This should be, to the best of your ability, a positive experience, because it's one that's going to make a difference, obviously, you know, in your career and obviously in your life as well. The other thing is, arrive early at Prometric. Make sure you have the proper ID. Bring your notice to schedule. Something that I'd recommend, if you want to Google top 10 mistakes CPA exam candidates make. Top 10 mistakes CPA exam candidates make. You'll see a list of them, and they're not, I won't say they're funny, but you'll be surprised at what they are. And, you know, people are like, I will never make that mistake. I will never go to the wrong testing center. I will never forget to bring my proper paperwork. I will, you know, I'm scheduled for financial and I brought my notice to schedule for audit. I was late. All these things that sound so sort of ridiculous saying them, but they happen to people. So this just goes to that, you know, being prepared, but also not leaving anything to chance. So make sure that, you know, you're detailed throughout, read all the, again, fine print as it were, but make sure you know where you're going, what day you're going, what exam you're sitting for, and that you have the proper paperwork and the ID. And then the last tip that I want to give you is mental fitness tip number 5. Please, please be prepared to wear a mask. You're going to have to wear a mask at the Prometric testing centers. It is a rule. You're going to be social distance. And I have talked with a number of candidates recently that did not practice preparing for the exam or taking a simulated exam wearing their masks. The first time that they put on their mask to test was at the testing center, and it was a distraction because they weren't used to it. So they were either fiddling with it or trying to get it comfortable, or if you're like me, I wear glasses, trying to get it situated so that my glasses don't fog up. I mean, these are, and again, these are real things, and it's a reality of the world we're living in. And so please, please take that to heart, and through your studies, make sure that you're getting used to that process so that when you go into Prometric, you go in, you get it, and you know exactly what you're up against, and you don't lose valuable time trying to get used to that. So that's the end of the presentation. I want to just encourage those of you, if you are a surgeon student, obviously I'm more than, like I said, more than willing to talk to you, but if you're not a surgeon student, please visit our website and learn more about our course. If you go to www.surgeoncpareview.com, you can find out more information about our product. I urge you to sign up for a free trial. You can sign up for a free trial, which is 5 days, and that will give you a real look at the material. It will give you a look at how our adaptive technology works. You'll learn a little bit about our proprietary Ready Score, which talks about being exam ready and what that actually means. So please do that. And then also, the other thing I encourage you to do is to sign up for one of our free mock exam workshops. And what those are, is if you notice, I spent some time talking about taking an exam, taking in a simulated exam. So Surgeon offers for free, if you're, obviously you get this as being a surgeon student, but if you're with another course or you're just somebody who's trying to learn about the process, sign up for one of our free mock exam workshops. You can do that by emailing me directly or going to info@surgeoncpareview.com, and we'll send you all the information. We run these once a month, and basically you get access to one section of your choice. You'll go through and you'll sit just as if you were sitting at the Prometric Testing Center. You'll take the exam, and at the end you get a fantastic diagnostic report that details your areas of strength, your areas of weakness, and really gives you a look at what your CPA exam readiness is. And even if you are a current surgeon student, even though the simulated exam software is contained within the course, if you want to join us for one of those, we absolutely encourage you to do that. So as I said, there's my contact information. It's weisp@surgeon.com. My phone number is there too. I would ask that you reach out to me via email. and anything related to signing up for a free trial, one of our free mock exams. If you're interested in academic or corporate discounts, you know, to more information maybe about how we can get you a discounted price depending upon the firm that you work for, or if you just would like a one-on-one consultation to discuss anything that we've talked about tonight, I am more than happy to do it. So we are at the 50-minute mark, which is good. Gives us a little bit of time left, so I'm going to pause for just a minute, and I am going to open it up for questions. And so go ahead and type those in the chat window if you like, and I will go ahead and take a look at those. So one question comes, how many screens do we have during the test, and what is the size of the screen? So you'll have one screen to take the exam on, but you will be able to split the windows, especially when you get into the simulations, to be able to do the calculations. And then what is the size of the screen? It's a good question. They just updated and did an overhaul last year of the actual, believe it or not, sizes of the screens. And so I want to say that they're 23-inch screens. That is a number that stands out to me. In fact, that's actually not a question I get asked very often, so thank you for challenging me on that. But I will be happy to, if you want to reach out to me afterwards, I will be happy to do that or find that out for you. Also, if you go to aicpa.org, there is a section in there about CPA exam readiness at the test site, and you can also take a look at that, and also Prometric.com if you're interested in knowing what those are. Okay, and this is an excellent question. So this came in and this said, will your strategy work for someone that has been out of school for around 10 years? So fantastic. I'm going to take a minute to answer this. The answer is yes, with a caveat. So let me give you some background on that. One of the things that we think about in terms of this exam, or really in terms of any sort of standardized test for a designation or a license, is we think of it as a young person's game, for lack of a better term, right? And so we think of all these new hires that are coming out of school and they're taking the exam, and then they're going to work for one of the big accounting firms. And then a lot of people do that. The average age of the person taking the CPA exam is 29.5 years. So if you think about what that means, considering in the aggregate how many people are taking it right out of school, you have a lot of people that have been out of school or are going back to school or are changing careers or just revisiting something that they haven't done for a while. So the answer is absolutely, because if you're somebody that's been out of school for 10 years, I'm guessing your age, maybe you're in your early 30s, just take, whatever it is, you can definitely do that. What you have to do, though, is you have to take a look at how you're going to study, and then you're going to have to take a look at what your approach is. And so what I mean by that is a lot of students will come into our course and take a look at our adaptive technology, and then they're not comfortable studying in that fashion because it's something that they're not used to, right? And so maybe they want to take a more traditional or linear approach, and so that requires a more fastidious sort of mapping out of how you want to do it. So what I tell people is if this is something you're truly considering and you want to talk about it, reach out to me, and I will work with you to show you what it would really look like. We'll take those calendars and we'll divvy it up, and I'll go through sort of month by month and show you what it would look like, right? Because a lot of it also depends on not only how long you've been out of school, but it also depends on, have you studied since then for those 10 years? Also, what have you been doing for work? Have you been immersed in the accounting world? Have you been an auditor? Are you new to it completely? All those things are sort of things we want to analyze. Then we can give you some pretty good ballpark figures of what a study program would look like. So, and yes, I see, okay, you're in your late 40s. That's okay. And totally understand. Believe it or not, I'm working with students right now. It's honest truth. I'm working with students that are in their mid 40s. I'm working with a gentleman who's my age. I'm 53. He's 53. We're going through this. So again, you can do it. It's just you got to really sit down and map it out. And then once you get into it, things will get easier. So again, happy to work with you afterwards if you'd like. Here's another question. It says, okay, I'm currently studying for financial through one of the competitors. I've been taking many, many practice tests, and I keep doing rather poorly. Do CPA exam review courses make the content harder to scare students into studying more? Okay, that's one of the best questions I've gotten in a long time. So, and again, I have a couple minutes here, so I'm going to give you a in-depth answer on this. So I'm going to talk to you about the way Surgent approaches it. So remember we talked about on the exam, each question has a point value, right? The other thing is that each question or part of a simulation has a relative difficulty level. So a good CPA review provider is going to give you questions so that the level of difficulty at least matches what you're doing on the exam, right? That's one of the worst things is if you get into the exam and the questions in the exam are harder than what you've seen studying. That is not a recipe for success. So it's not that the CPA review providers, and again, I'm speaking for Surgent, right? We try and match the difficulty level of the exam as close as we can. And people will tell you that our questions are as difficult or even perhaps a little bit more difficult than what's on the exam. But if you're struggling going through exam after exam, then that leads me to believe that there's something else at play there. What it means to me, or says to me, is that the retention is not there, or you don't have a good conceptual idea of where you actually sit in terms of exam readiness. So if you want, one of the things I can do, and again, this is totally fine, I totally understand you're working with another course, it's not a problem at all. We have a product called ReadyPass. ReadyPass is a free diagnostic. It's a 150 question diagnostic. It's not the same as the simulated exam, but it's actually a 150 question multiple choice diagnostic. You can go through whichever section you want, and you can go through and answer those questions, and then at the end it will give you a report, and it will tell you exactly what your areas of strength are, what your areas of weakness are, and where you need to focus. And again, that diagnostic report's pretty detailed, and it goes by individual topic within the section. And so I'm more than happy to help you with that if you would like. Or again, just kind of if you want to just, let me know like what your scores are, what your study process is. Again, when you're to the point of you're taking those practice exams and you're not doing well, again, it suggests to me that there's a retention issue or there's something else leading up to that. And so again, that's my best answer for you right now. Short answer is no. We create the questions and the exams to match what you're actually going to take as much as possible. So again, happy to work with you on that. We have another question. It says, are we allowed to do calculations on paper? No, you are not. Actually, you will be given a whiteboard and a marker, and that is what you will do your calculations on. So no paper, no pencil. You're also not allowed to bring in a calculator. Everything that you need for the exam in terms of a calculator will be provided for you, contained within the exam. You'll have that on screen, and then you'll have a whiteboard, and you'll have erasable markers to go ahead and do your calculations. Okay, and we got just about 1 more minute, so if there's any other quick questions, I'm more than happy to answer those. So again, just listen, everybody, thank you so much for attending tonight. We really appreciate it. Again, the overarching message of this is this can be done, whether it's 4 months, 5 months, whether you 9 months, whether you've been out of school for a while, whether you're new, wherever you're at, it can be done. Just you got to do the legwork up front, and you also have to think about the process throughout. Looks like we have one more question. It says, I've registered for FAR and audit. What window of time do I have to actually sit for both of those sections? So you're registered for FAR and audit. So it depends on which state you're in. So if you have the notices to schedule, usually they're good for 6 months. And some states, they vary. So California, I know they're good for 9 months. Texas, they're good for 3 months. Most states, they are good for 6 months. So it's related to the specific state. Now I'm going to cram this one in because it's 7:59. I've been curious, how do you simulate the actual environment used in the exam? So great question. So normally what we did, thank you for that. So normally prior to COVID, what we did is we actually would hold these in person throughout the country. So we'd hold them through our state society partners, or we'd hold them at specific universities, or wherever they are. So given that that's not an option, what we do is we have a specific date and time in which we ask everybody to meet up at. We do it through a Zoom webinar. We give everybody access to the software, and then they go ahead and we proctor the exam just as if you were doing it as per metric. And then, and again, the last question there about the Excel spreadsheet specifically. So the exam does use Excel now, and so our course uses Excel. So if you, that one sounds like something I may need to understand a little bit better. So why don't you go ahead and I'm happy to talk to you about that specifically and show you exactly how that works. So we're at the top of the hour, so I'm going to say thank you to everybody again for attending. I wish you the absolute best of luck in your journeys. You have my contact information. Please reach out to me and stay safe, everybody, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.